Take your career to the next level. The University of South Florida, St. Petersburg is offering a master's degree in digital journalism and design. Do the entire program from home and complete it in as little as 1 year. For more information, email journalism@usf.edu or call 727-873-4544. The cost is reasonable. The experience is invaluable.
Hey, everybody, if you like this podcast, can I ask you a favor? I'd love to make sure you also subscribe to the Poynter Report newsletter, where I bring you the latest news and commentary about the media industry every weekday. If you're already signed up, thanks a lot. But you should also check out some of the other great newsletters we have at poynter.org/newsletters. My colleague, Kristen Hare, focuses on the local news scene in communities all across the country every Wednesday with Local Edition. My editor, Ren LaForme, gives you the roundup of the best media stories from Poynter every Friday in his Open Tabs newsletter. And if you care about misinformation, fact-checking, getting to the truth, the Factually newsletter has you covered. And if you're looking for some great ways to improve your skills in writing, leadership, or ethics, our weekly training digest has you covered. Just go to poynter.org/newsletters and sign up today.
From the worldwide leader in journalism, truth, and democracy, this is the Poynter Report Podcast, a joint production between the Poynter Institute and the Department of Journalism and Digital Communication at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. Now here's your host from the Poynter Institute, Tom Jones.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. And today we have a topic I think that everyone can relate to, and that is how can people stay informed without getting overwhelmed in today's sort of nonstop chaotic news cycle? And help me talk about it, coming to us from Buffalo, where apparently it's hotter than where I am in Florida. It's Ren LaForme, the managing editor of Poynter.org, and I guess technically my boss, right? You're technically my boss.
Yeah, who wants to put a label on it?
I do come evaluation time. Anyway, Ren, thanks for joining me today. I want to start off with a story. And this was a couple of years ago, actually more than a couple of years ago. My kids are grown now, but they used to play sports, and they played, my youngest son was on a travel baseball team. At the beginning of the year, we were meeting the parents for the first time, and everybody was talking about what they do. And somebody asked me, what do you do for a living? And I said, I worked at a newspaper. I worked at the time at the Tampa Bay Times. I was a sports writer. And this parent told me, he's like, yeah, I don't read the newspaper. And I was like, really? Why not? And he said, yeah, I just don't like bad news. I just don't need it in my life. And I remember thinking at the time, like, how, like, that's sad. Like they, and I almost looked down a little bit at this parent for not being engaged in the news. And now lately, Ren, I kind of get it. I kind of get when people tell me, like, I don't look at the news. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to see it. So to start off with the question that I posed at the beginning of the podcast, like, how can people stay informed without getting overwhelmed by this stuff?
Yeah, I was thinking about this last night, and I don't think we could talk about this without first setting down a couple caveats. One, to butcher a Succession quote, you and I are not normal people, right? Like
not serious people. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. When we answer this question, we're going to have to use some empathy because you and I are basically plugged in all the time. Second, I mean, look, I've only been around for coming in on 40 years, but it feels like to me the news is faster than ever. Some people say that's by design. I don't know, but that is a situation that we're operating in, so we need to acknowledge that too. And then the third thing I just want to say before we begin this discussion is that generations, we know this from research, consume news differently. The way I access news and the way you access news is different. The way an 18-year-old or like an 80-year-old accesses news is different. So we're going to be speaking a little bit for ourselves. So just wanted to put that out there so that the X people don't come at me.
No, you're right. Because I think when I look at my parents' generation, even like me when I was really young, there was news on a few times a day. You caught it in the morning, you caught it maybe at noon, you caught it at 6 o'clock, and you caught it at 11 o'clock. And you watched, as far as national news, you had a half hour of it. Now it's 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's around the clock. It's on our phones. There are like more news sources than any of us can possibly count. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. On one hand, information's never been more available to us. But on the other hand, like information's never been more available. Sometimes I don't want it to be available. Sometimes I want it to like only come to me for certain parts of the day. So, I mean, like, are we, like, how do you think the average person is like consuming their news? Is it unhealthy, I guess, is a way to look at it?
I think it can be. There's a couple ways we can approach this, but I would start with the very simple advice of you don't need to engage right away. Because of the nature of attention spans in the internet, news organizations have gotten really good at sending you a ping, like, push notification. There's bombers heading towards Iran. I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to read that right now, right? Realistically, is there anything you and I could do about that right now? Not really. That is important news to read, but when that news came through for me last weekend, I was about to sit down for dinner with a friend I hadn't seen in 6 months. So I resisted that urge and put my phone back in my pocket. I think that if you are feeling overwhelmed with the news, that is the single most useful piece of advice you could probably take away from this podcast. But please keep listening.
Well, okay, so you bring up a really good point. I think I heard David Remnick, and I hope I don't, he's the well-respected editor of the New Yorker, and he was, I hope I don't butcher this, but it was saying something along the lines of like, he has friends, and I can speak for myself too, Ren. I have friends who I think are pretty sharp people, pretty intelligent, like to stay informed, who will completely shut off from the news. And I'm not talking for like a day. I think it's okay to do it for a day or two. But they just decide like, it's for my mental health, I'm going to stop following this stuff. But I think Remnick and I would agree with it. Like, there's a little bit of irresponsibility in that as well. I mean, we have some responsibility to stay engaged, don't we?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a part of our government system. You have to stay engaged with what's happening. I would give an inch on this topic. I would say staying engaged doesn't necessarily mean you have to be plugged into national politics 24/7. Truly, a lot of what is going on in national politics at any given time, even now, has little immediate effect on your life. I probably less so now than in times past, but I think you have an absolute uber responsibility to stay plugged into local news. We just had mayoral elections here in New York last night, and I was online watching that. I fired up the broadcast news stations for the first time in a while. When it comes to national news, I think there's a strategy you could probably put in place, which is like chunking it. Maybe a couple times a week, check in and make sure you know what's happening. But I don't think that's the tendency that people have right now, because I don't think that's what news organizations and social media are pushing on people. I think what we are trying to give them is constant.
Right. How are the news organizations, like, there's a part of me, Ren, that sometimes I would have said this maybe a month ago, where most people are probably listening to this like the week of July 4th. We're recording this a couple of days before that. And I think there were, like 3 months ago, there was this, I think a feeling of like, this is the biggest thing. This is the biggest news story ever. Remember, there was a point there where CNN actually, I think Mark Thompson, the president of CNN, came in. It's like, enough with the breaking news. That we don't need it all the time. And they were pumping the news up. But all of a sudden now we get to like, and we would joke like, oh, if World War III breaks out, then I'll start paying attention. For a minute there, it felt like World War III was actually going to break out. Like, serious, like we're not overstating it. But,
sure.
Do you ever get the sense, like, sometimes I feel like, okay, the CNNs and the Foxes and the MSNBCs are pumping up this story to make it seem like it's way bigger than it is. I don't know. I guess what I'm asking is like, so where's the line of like, yeah, this actually is a really big deal, to like, this is not a big, I need to pay attention to this right now, or no, this can wait,
Yeah. No, that's a good question. There's almost a boy who cried wolf aspect to this, where I do feel for news organizations, being in one myself, we're operating on our back feet. Fewer and fewer people are engaging with like mainstream traditional news outlets. And I think that creates a bit of a feedback loop where we have to say like, hey, this big thing's happening. We have the information, pay attention to us. And they do. But I mean, that's such a turnoff, right? If you had a friend who, was chock full of brilliant insights, but he was constantly yelling them in your face, you'd be like, okay, lower the dial a bit, buddy. I just this there seems to be a sense of proportionality that in the way news systems work, we can't say like, hey, we've got some good medium news for you. Maybe chime in an hour and check it out. There's just no way to do that.
Sometimes I'll like first thing I do in the morning. I don't know what your habits are. First thing I do, you have a baby toddler, so that's that's probably the first thing you do in the morning. I don't anymore, and so the first thing I do is I pick up and I look at my phone, and I don't, whether it's doom scrolling maybe, or it just like every day it seems like something new is popping up, and I'm going through X and I'm going through Facebook and I'm going through various websites, and I sometimes have to remind myself that maybe not, I'm so immersed in this world. You and I are both so immersed in this world. And a lot of us who are in media, we think that X, formerly Twitter, is real world. Where I'll ask my wife, oh, did you see what Trump said today? Or did you see what Chuck Schumer said today? Or did you see what happened with Robert? And she's like, no, I was at work all day. And she doesn't have a job in media. So there are times where I wonder, like, if you're in the media, are we overestimating the news? In other words, do we think everybody's consumed by this when they're actually not?
I think so. That's why I started the conversation with that caveat. It's hard for me to put myself in someone else's shoes, but I think that we are massively plugged in when others aren't.
Yeah.
And that was a thing that I'm not advocating for someone to have a child for this reason, but when there was suddenly something much more urgent in my house yelling at me, as opposed to on my TV or on my phone, I finally feel like I was able to break that unhealthy habit of checking. Back then it was Twitter every morning, and then going to every major news site and seeing what was going on. There's more out there in the world.
Do you think it's okay though? Do you think it's okay? Like, I'll do this. You and I work you work 6 days a week, basically. I work 5 days a week, and I work Tuesdays through Sundays, or Sunday through Thursday, I should say. Because that's the newsletter cycle that we put up. And when it gets to Friday and Saturday, which are my off days, I got to tell you, Ren, I unplug. I totally unplug, even though it's part of my job. Now, when I say totally unplug, I'm exaggerating. It's not totally. I do check email, and I will check X and everything. But for many people, they probably do what I do, which is when the news starts to become overwhelming, you're just sort of put like, la, 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 I'm not going to pay attention. So I'm going to watch bad reality TV. I'm going to watch a ball game. I'm going to read a book. I'm going to go out. I'm going to go walk in the woods or whatever. Is it okay to unplug? Like, is it sometimes I feel irresponsible doing that, but is it okay to do that?
I think it's imperative to unplug from time to time. I do the same thing on Saturday where I try to not read much news at all, if I can help it. And that's just because, as you know, I'm plugged in every other day of the week. I have read this in places. I'm not a fact checker by profession, so I don't know how true this is, but it feels true. So I'll go ahead and repeat it. I don't think human beings were meant to have this much input. I just think it's so overwhelming to have all this information about not only what's happening in our neighborhoods, not only what's happening in our federal government, but what's happening in the world. I don't think it's healthy for us to be just consuming that as often as at least you and I are doing. I'm going to steal this time from Gen Z, but it's important to go out there and touch grass. There's a whole natural world out there that if you tear yourself away from your phone for a little bit, you might find is pretty soothing.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that you and I were talking about this the other day is that it's maybe not necessarily how much news we're consuming, but the kind of news that we're consuming. You asked the question when we were talking about this the other day, is if you had to eliminate one category of news and say I'm going to stop reading opinion columns, or I'm going to stop watching shows where there are 4 people on a panel and all they do is yell at one another. Would that sort of not only improve our mental health, to stop watching that stuff. But would it improve like the trust that we have in news, which we know from all the surveys is eroding, that people are less trustful of the news? I think that would be a big part. What would you eliminate if you could eliminate like some part of the news?
First, let me go to bat for opinion columns, because I am so sad that editorials and opinions are fading from local and regional newspapers. I always love those and appreciate them. And I feel like they brought in my perspective. So, if Jeff Bezos, if you're listening to this, please bring them back to the Post. Have you ever heard someone say, I don't trust the media, and then ask them what they mean by that?
Yeah, right.
What they mean by that almost every single time is like your MSNBCs, your Fox News, your talking heads on I
don't like Rachel Maddow. Yeah. Or I don't like Anderson Cooper. Whatever. Yeah.
So if I could wave my magic wand and get rid of one of these things, I would get rid of partisan talking heads on TV, bringing in loud people who agree with them and make you feel like if you don't feel the same way as them, you're doing some type of terrible civic damage. I would get rid of, and look, they're not going to get rid of the list because that is both cheap for these networks and it does really well, right? Like these are the top watched programs. Sean Hannity, right. People love this stuff. So I could do with that.
Yeah, I like a lot of what CNN does. Recently, as we've seen the news really just get super active with what's going on with Israel and Iran and what's going on in Ukraine. That's when CNN's at its best. But if you were to probably look at their programming, one of their strongest rated shows is this 10 o'clock show that they have with Abby Phillips, where it's basically they bring in Scott Jennings, they bring a bunch of people to sit around and at times start yelling. And I'll be honest, like Ren, when I call up social media in the morning, that's the clip that pops on. It's not Carissa Ward coming live from Gaza or somewhere in the Middle East or Tel Aviv. It's people yelling at one another. So you're right. Like it's cheap to make. You just turn a camera on, put 4 people in a room and say go, as opposed to actually spending money on journalism. But at the same time, it's also like it gets people will watch that.
Yeah, our friends at MediaWise, which is a media literacy initiative that's part of Poynter, I think Alex was on last show. They have one of their sort of guidelines for engaging with news, and this is more of detecting, things that are true or not, but it works for this too, is if something makes you feel emotional, if a piece of news, like a clip makes you feel emotional, you should probably treat it with some skepticism, because, typically traditional news is delivered in such a, I don't want to say benign, but it's delivered in a way that's not trying to amp up your emotions. And those shows are doing the exact opposite. I also feel like here we should touch on the different ways a lot of people are engaging with news these days, which is, through social media, through news influencers, through YouTube. And people have been saying your news diet for years. And I've started thinking about that in a much deeper theoretical way, where, some of these things that go in depth but come from people who don't have traditional news backgrounds and aren't doing the primary reporting themselves, I think they're wonderful. I think they add really brilliant analysis and context to things that are happening in news. But if we talk about news as a diet, that to me seems like, I don't know, a bad carbohydrate or something that we should eat in moderation with spinach or fruits and vegetables or whatever.
I think almost like the original people doing that sort of thing. You could almost point to like a Jon Stewart, like with the Daily Show, where people were getting informed through Jon Stewart. I don't know if that was a good or bad thing. I don't think he was ever irresponsible, or he's never been irresponsible in delivering like his commentary. And I think that's the important thing to remember. And I think Jon Stewart would be the first one to tell you, like, I'm not a journalist. Like, I'm not here you could add other people to that list, John Oliver, or people who did the Daily Show in the past. But that's very similar, I think, to many of the influencers, some of the influencers that we're seeing online these days, or on TikTok, whatever. They're informative. They're helping me engage with the news when I might not normally engage in the news. But at the same time, let's be careful on how much, on how we're consuming them, or what, or the amount of weight we're giving their commentary.
And I do think you pinpointed the big difference there. Jon Stewart has always disavowed being, a journalist, and has said that he does not want to be the substitute for someone's like legitimate news consumption. The famous Crossfire interview in 2004, the old CNN show where, Tucker Carlson, who worked for CNN at the time, and, if some listeners can believe that, tried to say like, look, buddy, you did a really bad job interviewing John Kerry the other day. And Jon Stewart said, I'm not a journalist. If you are looking to me for like what you should be doing as a guy on a news network, you're looking in the wrong place.
Yeah, he said like, well, there's a show with puppets on that comes on right after me. Yeah.
Exactly.
But here's the other thing too, though. I understand why people like have these type of shows, Ren, because I think of somebody like Shephard Smith, who worked at Fox News for a long time, very well respected news anchor, left Fox News because he didn't like the direction that they were going, didn't like some of the things that were happening on that network. Started his own show on. It went to CNBC, and it was basically a straight news show, facts. Very good. I watched it a few times. It was a solid show. Nobody watched it, and it was off the air within a year, I think, or a year and a half. And it wasn't yelling, it wasn't screaming, it wasn't The Five, it wasn't Fox and Friends, it wasn't the show that CNN has on at night. It wasn't even like some of the stuff that MSNBC, where maybe they're not yelling, but they're certainly delivering a point of view. I don't know. I don't know how we can get people back to, and you talk about trust in the media. When you say, oh, we don't trust the media, it's like, they're not talking about their local. It's important to stay engaged with local news as well. And I just wonder at some of this national stuff, people are focusing on the wrong things, and then it turns into where they're not getting engaged with the right kind of news. I don't know if I'm making sense at this point.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, that's the push and pull we were talking about earlier, where to really break through and get viewers, you kind of have to be loud and a little bit, weird or brash or something like that.
Right.
So that's where Shep Smith's show, I think, failed. There are really interesting alternatives out there. Rick Edmonds, Poynter's media business analyst, wrote a few years ago about a British startup called Tortoise, which does slow news. I get their newsletter every morning, and it's always old news, like from the day before, because it comes out at the same time every morning. But the level of context and international analysis that they add, it's invaluable to me. I find it really compelling. And it's not yelling, it's not emotional, it's not flashy. It's just sort of like, here's some facts about what happened.
Right. You mentioned a moment ago, I just want to take a second and ask people, go back, and if you'd missed the conversation we had with Alex Mahadevan from MediaWise on a recent podcast, to check that out. Also, when you're looking at these podcasts, hopefully you're giving us a like, subscribe. It really helps us out a lot. Give us a good review, something to think about, so we can keep this podcast going and keep these interesting conversations to you. Ren, how should you asked this question to me the other day? How should journalists respond to this sort of public sense of fatigue or information overload? I mean, what can we do as journalists to sort of like loosen the burden or lighten the burden on people, or do we just keep doing what we're doing, which is like, hey, we're going to give you the news, and it's your responsibility to sort of figure out how much you're taking in?
Yeah, I think this is a bit of a macro problem where no one person can really do a whole lot to fix it. Individual journalists perhaps could try to find that sweet zone between finding an engaging headline and finding one that's like, makes people feel like the world's about to burn down. But I do think that, news systems have to be sort of remade to manage this type of thing. And I think that if you look out there, you will find that people are drifting toward at least some people are drifting toward a less brash type of news media. I mean, if you look at the rise of Substack, a lot of folks on there are writing very long, in-depth contextual pieces about this or that topic. At the same time, I guess though, that's rising as TikTok news influencers are rising who are on there, being very loud. And I don't know how do you watch those much? It's like nobody takes a breath on TikTok. That just as an aside, how do they do that?
I think, for us as news consumers, as journalists, obviously, I would like to think that we go to the right places to find our news. I'm not sure that most news consumers do. Sometimes they, I think, accidentally stumble onto misinformation, disinformation, or there's even times like we do this for a living, Ren. I saw something the other day and I'm like, I can't believe that guy said that. And then I realized, I'm like, is that really true? I almost walked away thinking like, oh, wow, I think that's true. It was a sports thing. Then I realized later, like, no, it was an AI thing. I think it was, but even still was like, it looked like it came from a legitimate source, and so sometimes when I'm overwhelmed by this stuff, like, I don't know whether you asked a really good question the other day, which was, is it better to be disengaged or to engage in news, but sometimes be misinformed? Like, where's that balance?
I think that's a bit of a false dichotomy that I put forth, but I think in that case it's better to be disengaged than misinformed, because by the time the misinformed people get far enough down that rabbit hole, it's really, really, really hard to bring them back. People who are engaging with news content that is putting forth all kinds of false information, they tend to fall into those narratives, and then it's hard to sell them a new one.
Is there, do you are there red flags? Do you notice red flags, like even personally, like red flags, like I need to step away, or I'm going to keep myself from going down this rabbit hole, even if it's not misinformation,
Red flags that I've engaged with too much news.
Yeah. Like, I mean, do you ever get a sense of like, where I need to walk away from this, but not because it's maybe necessarily because of my mental health, but because, I'm starting to crawl down this rabbit hole that I shouldn't be crawling down.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's anxiety. You can't see my desk right now, but there might as well be like claw marks in it from me digging my fingers in during certain news events. I try to myself, and this is something that our listeners could try. I try to do that 20-20-20 rule, where every 20 minutes you take 20 seconds to look 20 feet away. Unfortunately, my neighbor's house is like 10 feet away, so this is a bit difficult.
Wait, what is this? I have never heard this.
Yeah, it's just a good way to sort of, I think it was designed to let your eyes sort of rest. So
what is it again? 20-20-20?
Yeah, every 20 minutes, take 20 seconds to look 20 feet away from your screen.
Oh, wow.
I find that it certainly helps my eyes, but more importantly, it keeps me from perpetually doom scrolling, which is a habit that I think a lot of people have these days.
I usually do like the 20-20, which is work for 20 minutes, then close my eyes and go lay on my couch for 20 minutes. I shouldn't tell you that, my boss, but yeah, if you can't find me, if I sign off of Slack in the middle of the day, it's usually because I'm taking a nap and walking away for a few minutes. Like, as far as like the public's news fatigue and trying to alleviate some of that from them, but yet, Ren, we have to inform them. There's like something's happening every day. Something, whether it's another attack in Iran, or something's going on with ICE, or something's going on with protests in this country. Like, we can't not inform people.
Sure. Yeah. No. And I think those are big stories that need to be covered. And the journalists who are doing that work, bravo. Don't, change a thing. You're doing really, really important stuff. That said, that's not most journalists. I mean, there are maybe a couple dozen people reporting on Iran right now, maybe a couple hundred on the top end. Reporting on the protests, certainly more, but maybe. Well, I'll keep my opinions on what's happening at the Los Angeles Times and their staffing to myself. But most journalists are not writing about this stuff. I read the Buffalo News every morning. Very few things in there make me feel like, oh my goodness, like I can't believe the state of the world. And that's that's why I would say that this is a little bit more of an audience problem than a journalist problem.
You know, it's interesting that you brought up like some of the things you saw. You like you're reading the Buffalo News. Like I'm an avid reader of the New York Times. I think the New York Times is terrific. Are they a perfect newspaper? No, but I think they're pretty close. I think they're the best news organization going right now, and they'll mix in other stuff. So just as an example, on a recent day, I'm going through and I'm reading. They have stories on the attacks on the nuclear sites in Iran by the United States and the latest of going on with ICE and everything that's going on with Trump. Then all of a sudden I come across the 100 greatest films of the 21st century. Like they'll mix in stuff like that. I know you're big into food. You're a foodie, and you'll read. They have a great cooking section that they have Wired, which a lot of people like looking at. Even it's something like games, Ren, where like the New York Times has really figured out the games. So obviously Wordle, but they have a bunch of other stuff as well. Like, I think it's important that they have stuff like this because it's a nice break, so while I'm on the site actually looking at a story about Iran, I come across like, oh, I'll look at this for 15 minutes about why this film is the number 62 film of the 21st century.
Yeah, no, the New York Times has the best news website on the internet. And like, I would challenge anybody to right now, go to that website, scroll from top to bottom on the homepage and not click on like 5 things. It's impossible. They cover such a wide spectrum of news. Like, I don't know how many things they publish a day. I would guess it's well into the hundreds. And so much of it is compelling. And I think that's a good point too, that you're sort of inadvertently getting to there is like, read beyond the headlines and read beyond the breaking news. And you'll find that, like there is a whole complex system of really interesting things happening that you can engage with that don't make you feel like, the world's about to burn down.
Are you okay though? Like another thing the New York Times does that I think, and the New York Times is not alone. There are other papers that do this and other news sites that do this, is that while I'm looking at a story about actually what is happening on the ground in a place like Ukraine, say, or something going on with the protests in the United States, there'll be a column next to it and someone saying, here's what you should, or here's some more perspective on that. And like, I do think those, as much as sometimes we're talking about, let's shy away from the emotion, let's shy away from the yelling about it. Sometimes I think we do need a little yelling in our, at least maybe not even yelling, but at least some context as to like, okay, here's what this means. Here's what could happen next. I think those are important stories too.
Yeah. I went to bat for news opinion columns earlier. I think they're really beneficial to the ecosystem. It broadens my perspectives. Sometimes I walk away and I say, wow, what a blithering idiot. But a lot of times I don't. And I'm grateful for the news organizations for running those.
This is a question as we were putting together this podcast that you threw out there sort of as to wrap things up. But like any guilty news consumption habits that you would admit to, and have they changed over time for you? Do you think of anything?
No, I'm a perfect news consumer. I am a sucker, and this maybe shows exactly how old I am. I'm a sucker for going on Reddit and like looking at the comments that people leave under news stories. And like some of them are just so blisteringly dumb that it makes me realize, wow, people don't really have a good understanding of what's actually happening. But some are also so insightful that I learned something myself. I would say that's a little bit of a guilty habit. That's a little bit of a junk food, I would say, in terms of news consumptions. But I also subscribe to my wife's belief that there are no guilty pleasures. There are only pleasures.
Oh, I like that. I could use that. Look, I'm a big newsletter. I write a newsletter. You edit a newsletter. You write a newsletter. Like everybody has a newsletter. Everybody has a podcast. But I actually think that they done responsibly. I think that's what's changed over time for me. Obviously, we didn't have these things, even like for a lot of us, like 10, 15 years ago. But I think when I read some really smart newsletters that at that point they're assuming I already know the news, but I think those are, again, can be really helpful in the news consumption. It's a good way to sort of get your vegetables without again, without being online all day. There's a woman who works for the Washington Post, Amber Phillips. She has something called the 5-minute fix. Like it gives it, like, really hones in on one topic for that day, and it's 5 minutes. And I feel like, you know what? Okay, I can spend the other 55 minutes watching Below Deck or whatever, or watching some Vanderpump Rules, as opposed to like spending another hour just scrolling through the internet. So I think those are another way for people to like consume news. They're not guilty pleasures. They are. It's a pleasure to feel like you're informed and yet not spend all day doing it.
I'll give you my real one. It's this newsletter called Garbage Day by this guy, Ryan Broderick. He does a lot of great analysis of what's happening online, things like why, X has not done as well as Twitter, but he does it in a really funny way. And then if you scroll about halfway down the newsletter, he's just like, here's a funny TikTok. And it's just it's a really fun mix of stuff. Garbage Day. We have somebody who's our social engagement editor, producer, and she will put pictures of like her cat on her emails to us, and it's a silly thing, but if she were ever not to do it, I would be like, where's your cat? Yeah. And on that end, she also does the Poynter memes that appear on Instagram every Friday. And if you weren't checking those out, I don't know what you're doing, because they're pretty darn good.
Exactly. So, well, Ren LaForme, thank you so much. Any final thoughts for news consumers on how to consume news and not fall into the habits of doom scrolling or feeling like the world's going to come to an end?
You don't need to engage right away. I will start with that, and I will close with that. Set it aside and come back to it. Go have your dinner with your friend. Do what you need. The news will be there when you get back, probably. I don't know. Sometimes I worry.
Well, thanks so much, Ren. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching again. If you're watching this, give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us a good review. It really helps us a lot. Go back, check out some of our previous episodes of the Poynter Report Podcast. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Poynter Report Podcast. The podcast is produced by the Department of Journalism and Digital Communication at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. Executive producers are Elliot Weiser and Ren LaForme. Producer is Tom Jones, and our director is Christopher Campbell. And a special thank you to Neil Brown and Dr. Mark Walter.